Hello and welcome to the SYCK Career Podcast. And I'm really excited today to have a former colleague of mine at Google, Nadia Carta, who I've been following a lot on LinkedIn. I did not know her during my time at Google, but we have 104 mutual connections uh, in common on LinkedIn, and including she does her own podcast called 99 Humans, and we'll talk about that. And she does that with a former colleague and friend of mine, Jeff Lacusta, and we'll talk about that. But I want to welcome you to the podcast, Nadia. Please tell Acceleration Nation a little bit about yourself.
Oh, wow. I didn't know we had so many people in common. That's amazing. I gotta say, I'm loving this LinkedIn gig. I registered on LinkedIn in 2007 when I was a field seller, one of those sellers that would do cold calling. And back then was my first job. And I would use LinkedIn to find the people that I needed to call to get a meeting and sell my products. And fast forward, here we are so many years later, and it became such a big community. About me, well, first and foremost, thank you for having me. Since I started hosting my own podcast, I do love being a guest on other podcasts as well. 99 Humans, I say a little bit less about me to leave space to others. And sometimes I like to unveil a little bit about me. Where do I begin? So we didn't met at Google because I believe that when you were at Google, I was either in Dublin, in Paris, or Milan. I globetrotted a little bit. And what do I do now? I manage a sales team in charge of digital transformations with agencies for Google Marketing Platform. And so we do things like first party data executions, custom bidding algorithm. And when I hear myself talking about that, I know it's going to sound weird because I don't put my, let's say, tech hat on LinkedIn a lot. And I spent a lot of years in product, and I'm pretty nerdy and geek and all of that. But I decided intentionally that I wanted to put another version of me out there. I can always talk about Google Analytics and campaign manager tags if people want, but I find my other version of me far more interesting and far more impactful in this world.
Awesome. And on that note, on your LinkedIn profile, at the very bottom of your about profile, you're very clear in saying views are my own. So to separate those from your employer, Google. And I think you've created this other career for yourself. You've gotten you're a certified life coach, I believe, or a certified coach. Is it a life coach
I'm a
or a career
certified
coach?
coach.
Certified
Well,
coach.
when you're a coach, you can apply that to many areas of your
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. So how do you, and you're doing this 99 Humans project, which is amazing. We'll get into that. How have you managed to juggle those two different aspects of your career while Google knows what you're doing? You're doing this, like Google can easily see what you're doing publicly here with 99 Humans and your coaching. How do you manage those two things?
Well, this is a very good question, and I hope that people listening to this will take inspiration from it. There's one of our VPs that says that career and life is like a bouquet of flowers, and I love to quote her because she says for a bouquet to be beautiful, you need to have a wild arrays of flowers and not only one flowers. And so the things that you do in your life, the things that you do in within the company and outside the company eventually make your career a better bouquet. And I still remember, because I wasn't born this way, I still remember one of my first directors when I was like a very junior seller. I think I was 28 back then, and work used to be my whole life. I cannot even tell you. I used to be one of those people that would be at the office very early, 8:30.
Mhm.
I would be the last person to leave 8, 9 p.m. And I was just working, like working. I was one of the best sellers. And one day this director says, "What else do you do?"
Mhm.
I mean, I'm like, "What do you mean? What else do? I work." I was wrapped up in this idea that to be successful, I needed to devote my full self just to work, to my primary work. And it's not until I was in my late, probably like 33, 34, that I started developing an aspect of me beyond Google.
Right.
And, back then I started to be very, very interested in sports. And then I started to be very, very passionate about other things. And the coaching began in my, like, after I was 35, like I was already a mom and all of that. And it started because I was in a very dark moment. I was exiting a reorg that was a pretty harsh reorg back then. I remember I was crying every day. I was miserable. And, my director back then is like, "Nadia, I think you could really use a coach." I'm like, "I never worked with a coach. I don't even know what that is, but sure." I accept advice. I have a very growth mindset. And that's where my journey begins. So I took a long route to answer your question, because what I've learned is that whatever I do outside of Google makes me a better leader at Google.
Yep.
I could send you, the people that report to me so that you can ask them, "How is Nadia in the office?" And they will tell you that because I'm a mindful leader and because I'm so fulfilled with the impact that I have in the world, that I'm able to translate all of this inside the company and build a better company. Like, my motivation is to build a better Google. In my LinkedIn, I say I transform lives and corporations, because I believe that we can be a better corporations. And so by me be like that outside of Google and investing all of this in humanity, vulnerability, be better version of ourselves, makes me a better colleague, makes me a better manager, makes me a better seller. I'm interviewing at 11 a.m. one of my clients. She says, "I want to be on your podcast." So it's better relationships.
Yeah. You better close that sale, though. um, so you're a leader at Google. You've been there for almost 14 years now. And how large of a team do you currently lead, or how large of teams have you led over the course of your career at Google?
I've been in projects that were global, and I was coordinating like 30, 40 people, like
Mm-hmm.
super size. In my previous role, the two roles before this one, I was the European EMEA, actually. EMEA product leader for the Google marketing platform overall. I led staff like relaunching a product in 30 markets. I led pretty complicated stuff where people would look at me and say, "Hey, Nadia, what do we do?" Right? Now, I led a pretty agile sales team, and I'm very comfortable in doing both, because for me, leadership is not about knowing what your team does, but it is about providing that clarity and
Mm-hmm.
that vision of the direction that we are taking as a team. And then I trust everyone. Everyone is pretty smart. So I trust everyone to define how they're going to get there, how they should be prioritizing their time. And I'm always there for them to be a sounding board. And if someone says, "Hey, I have 10 things on my plate, which one should I prioritize?" I'd be like, "Okay, let's take some time and, do scenario planning. What would happen if we prioritize this? What would happen if we prioritize that?" So for me, leadership is something that I have in my heart, and it's pretty like, it's like who I am.
Yeah. And it seems like you really care about that. I've listened to your podcast. I've seen some of the stuff that you write about, and you really care about leadership. Um, Google just went through layoffs where they laid off 12,000 people. I I don't know if anybody was impacted on your team, but I know that a lot of leaders of people and a lot of leaders that really care about their people were blindsided by it because they were not brought into the fold. And just come 2 Fridays ago or whatever date it was, all of a sudden X number of people on your team are no longer there. Talk to me a little bit about how you, as a leader who really care about people, not just on your team, but other Googlers, how are you dealing with this? And like, we'll talk more about the people that are impacted from it, but as a leader that really cares about their people, you were not brought into the decision making process. You did not deliver the news to people. How is it like? Talk about from your perspective of how the layoffs were for you to handle as a people leader who really cares about people.
Alan, I grew up in an island that is called Sardinia, and I moved to America 2 years ago, 2020. And I still remember that when I was considering to move to America, I was brainstorming with one of my leaders, and I said, I'm not sure that I would want to go because what if I lose my job one day? I worked in Paris, I worked in Milan. In Europe, this concept is a bit foreign
Yep.
to our lives. People in Italy take a job and they do their job for 20, 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that you might get a call or you might get an email and you're not employed anymore, it's like alien to the way we're brought up. And so when we moved to America, actually, even my husband had to, leave his job. And for 1 year, he stayed unemployed. And, it took some time to find a job because we didn't have our papers and our visas and all of that. Mm-hmm. And of course, the past 2-3 weeks have been really, really tough on me emotionally. I couldn't sleep for many nights, and I acknowledge that I feel so grateful that I still have a job and all of that. But at the same time, I also recognize that America is very different. One of the people that reports to me one day said, Nadia, it's like I've been laid off like 3 times. And so my wife, we're used to this, and we plan our life around the fact that this can happen. And so this shift of mindset for me was like, okay, there's something new here that I need to learn. Now, granted that in the moment, for me, my reaction was, okay, I enter crisis mode. Managing a crisis is actually something that I'm really, really good at. Mm-hmm. And I keep my cool, and I showed up for my people to the point that someone on LinkedIn messaged me. I was doing coaching sessions with them. This was back in November, someone that was laid off from Meta. And they emailed me 2 days ago saying, Nadia, I just got an offer from another company. I'm so happy. And I was like, oh my God, I was manifesting this, and I'm so happy that happened. So this is to say that I am very, very clear in my life on what I can control and what I cannot control. And yes. I exercise deliberate effort on a daily basis to wire my brain on being very intentional on the things that I can and cannot control. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not sad. Like I'm not afraid of confess that I deal with my fair share of mental health issues myself. This week, you're seeing me today a little bit brighter, but until yesterday, I just wanted to be under my blanket. Right. I had a depression episode, and that was really, really tough and all of that. We gotta be mindful, Alan, on the things that we can control. And look, corporations are systems and institutions in this world. They obey to principles and requirements that sometimes we humans cannot see. And so for me, I don't even spend time in judging. Was that good? Was that right? Could we do it differently? Like, I like, it's not a good use of my time. I would rather say, how can I use my time? I can shop for other. I did a LinkedIn post when I wrote all the things that I can do to be in support. And I listed, I think, 9 things. And I said, anything else? It's out of my out of my scope.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it doesn't even help that I entertain conversations around it.
Yeah. And that's a huge thing about understanding what you can control and what you can't control, and also how some of these decisions were made, which are not fully in people's control, because it was not just the low performers. It was far from it, actually. Just like it's not like Google or Amazon or Salesforce just said, hey, let's take the bottom 5 or 8% of low performers and eliminate them. It was done in kind of a haphazard, arbitrary, inconsistent manner. Um, what, to your knowledge, like Google laid off 12,000. You said you're speaking to people at Meta. Meta laid off 11,000. Between Amazon, Salesforce, and Microsoft, there were 59,000 human beings that were laid off amongst these 5 companies, let alone all the other companies that are going through layoffs. From your insight within Google and from speaking to people, what rhyme or reason has led to these people getting laid off? Like, is there any pattern that you see, or is it almost wrong place, wrong time? Think like, were there things that individuals could have controlled to be in that 59,000 versus not to be in that 59,000 of people that were tapped by the corporate Grim Reaper?
I mean, honestly, as I said before, I don't even see the purpose of speculating and or even discussing. And I love that Scott Galway and other people that I follow, the Straight Tree, Ben Thompson, everyone is putting ideas out there. But I don't see a good use of my time
Yeah,
in rambling and in spiraling, because what difference does it make?
right.
Does it change an action that someone might do? Look, as I said probably earlier, I'm very spiritual. And there's one of my mantras that is like, okay, give it up to the universe on defining what is meant to be. I
Mm-hmm.
read my tarot cards every day. People might be laughing at this because sometimes the reconciliation between being a tech executive and reading tarot cards is a bit wild.
Yeah.
But I'm like, it would be the same things as happening as asking people in Turkey what you could have done to save
Right,
yourself from the earthquake,
right.
or the people in Ukraine. Is there anything different that you could have done not to be in the war?
Mm-hmm.
Or asking my mom, bless her soul, mom, what you could have done not to die of cancer at age 50.
Wow.
For me, there are things that they're just the way they are.
Yep.
And while we can learn, there's only one thing that we can be intentional, which is how we strengthened our mind and how we strengthened our head in saying, how would I react when I am posed with external forces? Like, look what happened with COVID. For 2 years and a half, we were locked down. Some people died, some other people didn't die. People that were super strong and healthy passed away. People that were smoking every day are still here. I joke with my husband. My husband is it's more cautious than I am on many things. And we have 2 daughters. And my daughter is very adventurous, my older one. She would be at the playground, she would jump, she would do like incredible things. And my husband would be like having heart attacks every time she's jumping from one pole to the other.
Yeah.
And me, I would be like chilled. I mean, granted that I suspect I have some mental things that I'm getting assessed for. But that being said, I like, you would see kids being hurt, literally being on the chair of their house, and then you would see kids being wild, completely safe. So there are just things, Alan, that we cannot explain. And so for me, going back to your question, I don't find any use
Yep.
or purpose in entertaining the spiraling of the whys.
I 100% agree there. So then, if we don't focus on the why and why it happened to us or why it didn't happen to us, are there things that individuals can do as you coach people, as you think about your career? And you're an immigrant to this country. So if you were to lose your job, you would have significant risk to you and your family and your daughters. So, are there things that you can do because you know that this could happen to you the next round of layoffs? So, what do you recommend for people to control the controllables so that if this um, unfortunate situation occurs, how people can own their career?
Yesterday, I was having this conversation with my coachee that found his job. I was so happy that he got an offer. And I asked them, out of this experience that you just had, what are you going to do that is different from now on?
Hmm.
Now that the sun is shining again on your
Yep.
life, what are you going to do to get ready when the rain will come again? Because one of the fundamental principles is to live by expecting that the rain will come. Now, I wasn't laid off, right? And throughout my life, I went through my fair share of obstacles. I actually did a TED talk about it because, people would see me all, oh my gosh, she's a tech executive. She lives in downtown Manhattan. She has two people. Like, my life from the outside looks pretty glossy and
Uh-huh.
looks like pretty perfect. So I'm always very intentional in sharing the not visible. And I always say, people, the one thing that you can do that is in your control is get better at resilience. And I don't want to sound cheesy, but I'm sure you've been following all the trend about the cold showers and the cold plunges. I've been talking about on LinkedIn as well. Take the cold shower. Take the 6-minute ice bath. Go for a run. There's a person that I'm obsessed with. I don't know if you know him. His name is Joe DeCina, and I used to run Spartan races a few years ago before I had my children. I need to go back at it. And when you listen to Joe DeCina and his content in his podcast, he says something that it's fascinating to me. That he said, if you continue to live a life that is comfortable, the first time that you are in discomfort, you're gonna crack.
Hmm.
And so there's this whole philosophy that is about you need to be intentional in building your body and your mind to face discomfort, which also includes how you get ready for bad news, how you get ready if something tragic happens. How do you develop that resilience to bounce back? So that's number one. Invest in developing your resilience.
Yep.
Number two, take an honest assessment about your assets. And when I say your assets, that includes who you are. So, who you are in this planet is your most important asset. So, would you invest in yourself?
Hmm.
Would you fuel yourself? If you were an external person and you were a company, would you buy shares of yourself?
Right. It's an interesting take.
Would you bet? Would you bet on yourself? One of the things that I ask myself as a leader when I self myself for our Google assessment, I ask myself, if I go out tomorrow and I ask hundreds of people, would you follow me in climbing this mountain? And I promise that when you are at the top, you will be happy. Would people follow me? Would people say, I want to trust you that there will be happiness there after I go through this pain? So that's for me is number two. Like, what are you doing to become an asset that is worth investing? Are you the CEO of your life? And that leads to number three, which goes back to the bouquet that you and I discussed, is how is your life diversified? Are you that person that is just work like I was when I was 30. When I was 30, I don't know if I would have invested in myself. I mean, I'm so grateful that I had directors and managers that saw my grit. And maybe that's why they gave me, space. But what are you doing to diversify? And that doesn't mean that you're not performing in your life or at work. I've been invited to be a speaker at the International Women in Leadership Summit in Boston in May. And for the first time, I'm going to deliver my Spark Your Zeal speech.
Spark your
I
what?
brought Spark Your Zeal.
Okay, got it. Spark your zeal.
I brought a signature talk, and part of it is, what are your personal metrics? How are you diversifying and having metrics to say, hey, like, I'm an interesting person. I have a variety of options. So for me, these three things are in your control. And then there's a fourth one, but this is a little bit woo-woo. I don't know if I can share.
Go ahead.
Well, it's interesting. So there are a few things that not many people know about me, but I grew up in a religious community. And when I was 18, I escaped. This is a story is going to be in my book, in my memoir that I'm writing. And it was pretty wild. And, I stayed very far from spirituality for 20 years because I was like so burned out from that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And only lately I started again approaching the spiritual realm. So I know we spoke about tarot card and the universe and all of that. But this is to say that the fourth thing is you make up your reality. There's now neuroscience evidence that the brain doesn't distinguish between lived experience and thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure a lot of people listen to Dr. Uberman, Lewis Au. There's a lot of content out there. And what are you manifesting for yourself? What are the affirmations that you are saying to yourself? How are you talking to yourself? Are you saying to yourself that you are a successful, thriving human being? Or are you putting yourself down, saying that you're not worth it, that everyone hates you, and that you hate your boss? Like, what is the reality that you're building for yourself? And so there's Adam Coelho that I know you know as well. And Adam and I speak a lot about this concept of manifesting and the mindfulness, because you got to spend time on a daily basis to visualize what you want. I never thought that I would have been here in Manhattan downtown. I never thought that I would have been even joining Google. When I was 6 years old and I grew up in Sardinia, I was like, what am I going to do?
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that it's enough to sit down there and saying, oh, sure, I'm going to manifest my penthouse in Central Park. That doesn't work. But your thoughts and how you live your life eventually are going to create your experience.
Yeah. And you mentioned something before about this talk that you're giving in Boston about following your zeal and talking about what are your personal metrics. So I'd love to hear what your personal metrics are that you measure your career or your life against. Because as a former Googler myself, you're at Google. Google likes to track and measure things, and they beat that into me positively. But like, what are the personal metrics, your personal metrics that you look to measure your success on?
Look, I used to be that person that if I wasn't getting the rating that I wanted, I would be depressed. I wanted to be promoted all the time. And I used to measure myself in corporate success and all of that. Now, I'm not saying that I don't look at that anymore because I would be lying. I love to thrive in a corporation and I want to continue growing and I'm an ambitious person and all of that. But that now is a component. It's not anymore the main thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I do a lot of career coaching as well. And I take assessment of where I am every year. And so within my personal metrics, the four more important ones, I actually created an hashtag to keep track of myself. It's called SMSJ. Hashtag SMSJ. So first one is sleep. And
Mm-hmm.
I know it's going to sound funny and basic, but this week, for example, I had a horrible week because my sleep was all over the place. I had nightmares every night. I wasn't getting enough hours. I wasn't feeling well. And everything started falling apart. I couldn't pull myself up to go to the office.
Wow.
So bad. So bad. So sometimes I decline a dinner if it's too late, because I know that if the day after I have an event and I'm not going to get my hours of sleep, I'm going to be miserable. So at this point in my life, age 40, and I prioritized that. And my only way to understand it was the sleep deprivation. I have two young children. I didn't
Yeah.
sleep for many years. And, that was a check on me. So sleep is number one. Number two, movement. If I don't move my body, if I'm not taking that walk, if I'm not going to my yoga class, my Pilates class, my bootcamp class, everything else falls apart. So it's interesting when I look back at the week on Sunday and I'm like, oh, I'm feeling like a truck just hit me. Then I look at my schedule and I'm like, yeah, no wonder. I couldn't get a break for myself. I was back to back in meetings.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a reminder. Movement, it's a metric.
Yep.
Then self-care. And when I talk about self-care, this is a topic that I discuss a lot with other moms and women. I'm in a lot of circles and communities. Women, we are wired to give. I'm not saying that men are not givers, but women are, from an archetypal perspective, we are wired to give. Whereas we need to remember that we need to receive as well. And so, self-care can mean a lot of things. Can be my therapy session, can mean my time by myself, can mean that dinner with my girlfriend, can be that massage, can be journaling. So what are you doing for your self-care? And then my J, that is the one that is amplifying all of it, is joy. I ask myself on a daily basis, what are the things that are giving me joy? How is my plan fueling my joy? Do I have joy in my life? And it's interesting that when the joy falls apart, like this week, I'm going to be very honest, I haven't done anything that gave me joy. It was like a straight line of back to back meetings, very rigorous. Even in my family, it was like, what the heck? And, I said, this is Friday. I'm happy that I have three things that give me joy, including this podcast and my
Yes.
podcast.
I was going to ask about that. I was like, this is not giving you joy.
This is giving me joy because those are the things that I love, uplifting others. Or this
Yeah.
morning, one of my friends emailed me and she was like, your interview is out. And I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. Like uplifting the world. So that gives me joy. And I feel that I'm going to be a better person for my family tomorrow, a better person for my team, and a better person for the world. So those are my 4 metrics.
Yeah. I think that's great. And I think also you mentioned that women are more givers. I noticed, I don't always look at this on people's LinkedIn profile, but you have 9 recommendations that people went out of their way to say, hey, Nadia, you're a great person. And they wrote that, but you actually wrote 18 recommendations for others. So I don't know if that's your normal ratio of a 2-to-1 of giving versus taking, but I'm a numbers guy. And I saw that. I was like, wow, this woman is a giver. And there's also lots of people that are appreciating what you do. So thank you for that.
Well, Alan, 9 is my lucky number, so I'm so happy that it's coming. I'm very big in numerology. I'm gonna close with this because I know we're at time.
Yeah.
As I said, I'm very big with spirituality, and I'm very big also with astrology. And I don't know if this is too woo-woo for your podcast, but
it's okay. We need more woo-woo in our podcast, so that's good. let's bring the woo-woo.
Just last week, I started going back to my natal chart, and I went to an astrology session, and I started following Chani Nicholson, which is amazing. And I was reading my natal chart, and for the first time, I started digging into the real meaning. And I have a lot of planets in my 12th house. So if there are people that are going to listen to this, they will know what I'm talking about. But basically, the 12th house is the house that tells you what are going to be the field of operation in the world. And I'm telling you, I have goosebumps when I'm saying this, because there was a sentence that said, "You were brought into this world to support others and be a light for people that are struggling mentally,
Mm.
that need support, among other things." And this for me was like, radical acceptance of who I am. And
Hmm.
so, yes, I'm a giver. And learning how to receive for me was a new muscle. And all my life, I've always been a giver. And I will continue to be a giver, because the light that I receive back from people that receive my energy, it's like the best fulfillment that I can possibly have.
That's amazing. And we are running low on time, but I do have three last questions for you, and they'll be fairly quick. The first one is, you've offered lots of great advice about measuring measuring your progress and focusing on joy and other things. If there's one last piece of SYCK career advice that you would like to leave my listeners with, what would it be?
Invest in your most important asset, which is yourself, your skills, your network. That training that you wanted to take, go take it. That website that you wanted to build for yourself, build it. That person you want to connect, connect. You are the most important asset.
Got it. Great point. Invest in yourself. Second thing, um, how can people best find you, follow you, and connect with you?
So I'm on LinkedIn. I've been investing a lot more in this platform lately. I'm also on Instagram and all that. But on Instagram, you can find the woo woo Nadia. On LinkedIn is more of the executive and coach. So both works. And I'll be launching my website later in February. So
Great. And third thing, as I work to develop a title for this, I'm always looking for help in developing a title. So after this conversation we had over the last 35 plus minutes, do you have a good title recommendation for this podcast that you'd like us to use?
oh wow. I think it's really spark your zeal for life.
I like
You
that.
know? It's that simple, because there's nothing more important than developing that passion and zealous mindset for your own life.
Awesome, Nadia. Well, I am so glad that even though we overlapped at Google, and I know you said you were working in EMEA, I've worked on global teams, so we probably crossed paths on some threads. I'm glad that this beautiful community of LinkedIn allowed us to reconnect. Our 104 common connections also like probably served you up in my feed or something like that. But it's really been great to chat with you, get your insights, get your advice, and I can't wait to hear more about the 99 humans that you and Jeff are busy researching, studying, and helping others grow with.
Oh, thank you for offering this space, and I look forward to have you on 99 Humans.
I'm looking forward to it too. Thank you, Nadia.
Bye.